So today we're diving into some really cool research that's all about teaching machines to understand us on a deeper level. Not just what we're saying, but how we're actually feeling. We're going to deconstruct emotion right from the sound waves of human speech.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Human emotion is, well, it's messy, it's complex, it's nuanced, it changes from moment to moment. So how in the world do you get a machine, a piece of code, to listen to a voice and tell the difference between happy and surprised, or calm and angry, when all those clues are buried deep inside the sound itself?
Okay, here's our game plan for today. We'll start with why this is such a tough nut to crack. Then, we'll get into the core technique they use, called VMD. We'll see how they pull out what they call emotional fingerprints, understand the AI that makes the final decision, and then, the moment of truth. We'll look at the results.
All right, first up, the challenge of digital empathy. Let's dig into why recognizing emotion in speech is just so incredibly hard. It turns out the answer is rooted in our own biology. Think about it. When you feel an emotion, it's not just in your head. Your entire body responds, and that includes your voice. The actual physical shape of your vocal tract, your throat, your mouth, your tongue, it all changes. This acts like a constantly shifting filter on the sound you produce, creating a unique, super subtle acoustic signature for every single emotion.
So, to tackle this massive challenge, the researchers brought out a really powerful signal processing tool. Let's get into how they deconstruct speech using something called VMD. Here's the whole workflow at a glance. First, they take the audio, clean it up, and slice it into tiny 20-millisecond chunks called frames. Then comes the magic. Each little frame is broken down into 5 fundamental parts using variational mode decomposition, or VMD. From those parts, they pull out a bunch of key mathematical features. And finally, a classifier, an AI called a support vector machine, looks at all those features and makes the call.
So what on earth is VMD? Well, the best way to think about it is like a digital prism, but for sound. You know how a regular prism takes a beam of white light and splits it into a beautiful rainbow? VMD does pretty much the same thing to a complex sound wave. It breaks it down into a set of simpler frequency bands, which they call modes, allowing them to analyze the emotional content at all these different levels.
Okay, so we split our sound signal into its own little rainbow of frequencies. Now comes the real detective work, sifting through those modes to find the mathematical clues, the actual emotional fingerprints.
And they're not just looking for one thing. They pull out a whole arsenal of features. You've got statistical measures from the VMD modes themselves, like the interquartile range and median absolute deviation. Then you've got other things like energy and spectral features. But they also bring in a real heavy hitter, Mel frequency substral coefficients, or MFCCs, which tell us about the shape of the speaker's mouth. It's this whole combination that makes the system so powerful.
Now, let's zoom in on one of these for a second, because it's super clever. Median absolute deviation, or MAD. You've probably heard of standard deviation, right? Well, you can think of MAD as its tougher, more street-smart cousin. It measures how spread out the data is, but with a crucial advantage.
So why is MAD so great for this? Because real-world audio is messy. Someone might cough, a door could slam, or there's just a weird pause. A normal standard deviation would get totally thrown off by those things. We call them outliers. But MAD? It basically just shrugs them off. It's not fooled by those extremes, which gives us a much more stable and reliable emotional fingerprint.
Let's actually look at what this data tells us. This graph here is showing the very first mode. That's the lowest frequency band. And you can see it right away. There are clear, distinct patterns. Check out the peak for the calm emotion. Now compare it to the peak for angry. They're in totally different spots. The VMD is already starting to pull these emotions apart.
Now let's jump up to the next frequency band, Mode 2. And whoa, look at that. The picture totally shifts. Suddenly, the angry signal has this huge dominant peak in a completely different area. This is so cool because it proves the whole theory. The little clues for different emotions are hiding out in different frequency bands. That's exactly what VMD is designed to uncover.
But here's the thing. VMD is amazing, but it can't do it all by itself. To really boost performance, they needed another key piece of the puzzle. That's where the MFCs come in. These are basically a way to mathematically describe the shape of the vocal tract, that physical filter we were talking about at the beginning. This is the secret ingredient that really supercharges the whole system. So now we've got all of our features extracted. The VMD stats, the spectral features, the MFCCs, the whole shebang. We have this rich, complex data point for every tiny slice of speech.
Now we need something to look at this huge pile of numbers and make the final call. That is the job of the classifier.
The researchers use a support vector machine, and the most important choice they have to make is what's called its kernel. Now, a simple linear kernel tries to separate emotions using a straight line, but emotional data isn't clean and simple. It's messy and all overlaps. That's where the RBF kernel shines. It can create these complex, curved boundaries, making it perfect for a nuanced task like this.
So how does it work its magic? It's kind of mind-bending, actually. The RBF kernel performs this clever mathematical trick where it takes that tangled mess of emotional data and projects it into a higher dimensional space. Imagine a knotted ball of string on the floor. It's impossible to separate, but if you could magically lift it into the air, the different strands might separate out. That's what the RBF kernel does. It finds a new perspective where the inseparable becomes, well, separable.
All right, we've gone through the theory, the methods, all the different components. Now it's time for the payoff. How well does this system actually perform at recognizing 8 different emotions? Let's get to the verdict.
Okay, so if you only use the statistical features from VMD with the simple linear classifier, the system gets an accuracy of 31.2%. Now that's a decent start. It's definitely better than just random guessing, but it clearly shows that the VMD features by themselves aren't enough.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when you add in those crucial MFCCs, those other spectral features, and you switch to that much more powerful RBF kernel? Boom! 61.2%. The accuracy just about doubles. That is a massive leap in performance, and it validates the entire approach. It proves that it's the combination of VMD, MFCCs, and a sophisticated classifier that's the key to making this work.
This table really puts it all in perspective. That first row is our baseline, starting at 31.2%. But the second row shows the power of the complete system. That huge jump from 31 to 61% comes from enriching the feature set and, just as importantly, using the right classification tool for the job.
And get this, it's not just more accurate, it's also more efficient. The paper compares this method to a much more complex, heavy-duty deep learning model. And it turns out this VMD-based approach is not only more accurate, it's also less computationally intensive. So you get better results with less computer power. It's a win-win.
And all this brings us to a final, really big question. We're moving away from computers that just understand our commands to computers that might actually understand our feelings. As this kind of technology gets better and better, pushing past that 61% accuracy mark, you have to wonder, how will that fundamentally change the way we interact with the digital world all around us?